FOMC is the main event, but we did just have that government shutdown noise. How does that sort of muddy the waters, or does it maybe even clarify the timing for this liquidity shift you're talking
And
about?
look, the recent U.S. government shutdown might have paused some data releases, right? But the underlying factors, they haven't stopped ticking.
How does Ethereum slot into this picture? Like, why ETH specifically?
ETH was quietly carving out what we've been calling its miracle zone. It all points towards ETH being ready to potentially outperform here in Q4.
Why is this the one you see as so decisive for ETH maybe taking the lead?
And when that liquidity dynamic shifts, historically Ethereum tends to lead those rotations.
People say that a lot, but what's the actual mechanism there?
Well, the reaction could be pretty explosive. ETH still has unfinished business this cycle. Definitely not the time to be sleeping on Ethereum.
You know, it's got the feeling, doesn't it? The market, it's just unnervingly quiet right now. But history kind of tells us that this quiet, well, it often comes right before a pretty serious shakeup. So today we're doing a deep dive into what looks like a storm brewing under Ethereum specifically, and how that connects to the big macro event everyone's watching, the upcoming FOMC meeting.
Yeah, that's spot on. We've definitely been anticipating this pocket of turbulence in the macro reports. And look, the recent U.S. government shutdown might have paused some data releases, right? But the underlying factors, they haven't stopped ticking. Liquidity, rates, market positioning, it's all sort of converging on this Fed decision.
Okay, so the macro stage is set for some action. How does Ethereum slot into this picture? Like, why ETH specifically?
Well, it's actually positioned quite interestingly. While Bitcoin was, chopping around, consolidating, ETH was quietly carving out what we've been calling its miracle zone. And that wasn't just some random level. It's a technical floor we identified back in June based on longer-term capital flows. The fact that the price dipped right to it and held, that suggests real conviction, not just a quick trade. It feels less like a trap and more like a launch pad. Plus, you look at the ETH-HBTC pair, other metrics, it all points towards ETH being ready to potentially outperform here in Q4.
Right, but there are always potential catalysts, aren't there? Why this particular FOMC meeting? Why is this the one you see as so decisive for ETH maybe taking the lead?
Good question. It's about timing, really. This feels like the inflection point. You've got this rising chatter about rate cuts becoming more intense. But crucially, you also have quantitative tightening QT, which has been sucking liquidity out that's getting close to its expected pause point. And when that liquidity dynamic shifts, historically, Ethereum tends to lead those rotations.
Why, though? Why does ETH lead? People say that a lot, but what's the actual mechanism there?
Yeah, it's because ETH often acts as the, let's call it the high beta play on expected easing. Think of it like this. When institutional money anticipates looser financial conditions, easier money, they often rotate into assets like ETH to front-run that shift. It offers, reliable leverage on that theme. This FOMC is critical because the market has already priced in cuts by, say, December. This meeting will either validate that view or pour cold water on it. That confirmation or denial is what could really open the floodgates for a liquidity movement. ETH is kind of the bridge there.
Okay, FOMC is the main event, but we did just have that government shutdown noise. How does that sort of muddy the waters, or does it maybe even clarify the timing for this liquidity shift you're talking about?
Shutdowns are typically short-term noise, yeah, but they often create long-term opportunity. If you look back, markets tend to rally within about 15 days or so after a shutdown ends. Now, if that recovery rally happens to coincide with a dovish signal from the Fed, well, the reaction could be pretty explosive. And while Bitcoin might see some choppiness, maybe from ETF flows or whatever, Ethereum's setup with its supply dynamics and recent staking strength just looks cleaner right now. It seems poised to lead that potential next leg up.
You said ETH looks ready. Are we just looking at two simple outcomes then? Fed eases, ETH flies, Fed stays hawkish, ETH drops? Or is there a middle ground where things just stall?
A sideways grind is always, a possibility. But the pressure's building up. It feels like the volatility dam is pretty full. I think the higher probability is actually a focused burst of energy, maybe a mini ETH season, you could call it. It feels like the market taking one last deep breath. And remember, ETH still has unfinished business this cycle. It hasn't hit its higher time frame target yet. So yeah, the two main paths seem pretty clear. One, Fed signals easing is coming. Liquidity floods back in. ETH likely moves quick, sharp, vertical. Two, Fed stays really hawkish, pushes back hard against cuts. Then you'd expect a short-term shakeout, maybe one last fast liquidity trap to scare people out. Either way, the next few weeks, definitely not the time to be sleeping on Ethereum.
Okay, so positioning is key, but just to press again, why are you emphasizing ETH over Bitcoin for this specific scenario?
It really comes down to speed and structure. If that liquidity dam breaks, the market tends to re-rate growth-sensitive, higher beta assets like ETH very quickly. We're entering that phase of the cycle where how you're positioned often matters more than trying to predict the exact top or bottom. It's that period where, wealth can quietly shift hands from those reacting emotionally to those who are prepared for that brief window of opportunity. It might be measured in hours, not weeks.
That definitely puts the focus on being ready. So to wrap this up for you, the listener, think of this upcoming FOMC meeting less as just a rate decision and more as a potential liquidity reset. And based on the structure and flows, Ethereum seems uniquely positioned to maybe steal the spotlight here. So don't let this surface calm fool you. Because sometimes, as they say, silence is actually the loudest signal.